Good evening, everyone. I'm Tracy Glab, Executive Director of the Flint Institute of Arts Museum and Art School, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's Sheppy Dog Fun Lecture. Tonight we have Dr. Lawrence Nichols presenting Stunned by Art, the Stendhal Syndrome. And thank you for making time for this because this was supposed to happen in December, and we had weather. It just doesn't seem to have ever let up since then. But we're very grateful that Dr. Nichols made the trip up from Ohio to be with us tonight. So yes, that's a good. And for all of you to be here in the audience, even though it's still freezing cold out. So the Sheppy Dog Fun Lecture Series was established in 2012 by Dr. Alan Klein to address the topics of art, religion, and history. Thank you, Dr. Klein, for continuing to bring these wonderful lectures to the FIA. The next Sheppy Dog Fun Lecture will be on Wednesday, March 25th. Dr. Shelley Perlow will be presenting Memory and Reflection, Chagall's Unique Modernism. And I also want to point out, I don't have a slide for it, Craig, but I wanted to just mention, because last time we had a sold-out situation, our Sheppy Dog Fun Lectures are free to the public because of Dr. Klein's generosity. But the next the lecture after Dr. Perlow's is on April 22nd, and it is called Mezcal in Oaxaca, a craft spirit for the global market. It's all about mezcal, which is used to make tequila, and so there's going to be an exclusive tequila tasting after that lecture. Yes. So that is a ticketed event, so you do need to pay for that, and pre-registration is required. You must be 21 with photo ID, so make sure you bring that. But do register, if you're interested in that, do register in advance, because like I said, when we did this for the absinthe tasting, it was sold out, and we had to turn lots of people away. So do get your tickets in advance. So before I introduce our guests, let's do some housekeeping. First, I would like to thank the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation for their continued support, which is so deeply appreciated and vital to the FIA. I would like to thank the citizens of Genesee County for demonstrating their support of the FIA by means of the Genesee County Arts Education and Cultural Enrichment Millage, which provides free entry to the FIA for Genesee County citizens 7 days a week. And a big thank you to Huntington Bank for sponsoring Huntington Free Saturdays, which allows everyone beyond our county to have free entry on Saturdays. I would also like to note that assisted listening devices are available at the FIA. You can request one at the front desk or use your own Bluetooth device by scanning the QR code and downloading the Listen Wi-Fi app. Be sure to connect to the FIA-ALS Wi-Fi network before opening the app. Now, please take a moment to silence your electronic devices. Dr. Lawrence W. Nichols is Curator Emeritus at the Toledo Museum of Art, from which he retired in 2021. He joined the museum in 1992 after serving as Associate Curator of the John G. Johnson Collection at the Philadelphia Museum of Art from 1986 to 1992. He received his BA from Dartmouth College and Ph.D. from Columbia University. A specialist in Northern Baroque painting, he wrote the Paintings of Hendrick Goltzius, 1558 to 1617, a Monograph and Catalogue Raisonné, and that was published in 2013. And he's curated numerous exhibitions. Some of you, I'm sure, have at least went to one or more of these, including the Brilliance of Caravaggio, 4 Paintings in Focus, Frans Hals Portraits, A Family Reunion, Manet, Portraying Life, and one of my favorites of those, A Van Gogh Fields. Nichols continues to serve on the Old Master Paintings Vetting Committee of the European Fine Arts Fair held in Maastricht each March. In addition, he serves on the Art Advisory Panel of the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue. He chaired the International Indemnity Program Panel of the National Endowment for the Arts from 2016 to 2020. Everyone, please join me in a warm Flint welcome for Dr. Lawrence Nichols.
Tracy, thank you very, very kindly for those kind remarks. This is what I will deliver this evening, which was planned for the 10th of December. But because on the 10th of December, the weather wasn't so fine, here I am, and my thanks to the museum for rescheduling and also for all of you for appearing this evening. On the 15th of December 2018, a tourist visiting the Uffizi galleries in Florence had a heart attack while admiring Botticelli's renowned painting, The Birth of Venus, created around 1485. 2 years previously, another tourist had an epileptic fit in front of the picture. Chance? Mere anecdote? Or is it possible that there is more to account for such occurrences? 2 centuries earlier, on the 20th of January 1817, the French novelist Marie-Henri Beyle, who would adopt the pen name Stendhal, whose portrait by a minor Swedish painter, Olof Johan Södermark, you see here, would record in his journal, published in 1826 in his book, Naples and Florence, A Journey from Milan to Reggio, quote, "As I descended upon Florence from the high ridges of the Apennine, my heart was leaping wildly within me. What utter childish excitement." Beyle headed immediately to the Basilica of Santa Croce, which you see here at left. Got a little ahead of myself as I get used to this pointer. That's what I was pointing at. He notes his response to being in the presence of the tombs of Michelangelo, Machiavelli, and Galileo. "The tide of emotion which overwhelmed me flowed so deep that it scarce was to be distinguished from religious awe." At his request, a friar unlocked a chapel that Stendhal wanted to visit. Quote, "He introduced me to the place, then left me to my own devices." Stendhal continues, "There, seated upon the step of a pray stool, with my head thrown back to rest upon the desk, so that I might let my gaze dwell on the ceiling, I underwent through the medium of Volterrano's Sibyls," and he's speaking of the pendentives there and correspondingly around the dome, and I show you all 4 of these pendentives at right. "I underwent through the medium of Volterrano's Sibyls the profoundest experience of ecstasy that, as far as I am aware, I ever encountered through the painter's art. My soul, affected by the very notion of being in Florence and by the proximity of those great men whose tombs I had just beheld, was already in a state of trance, absorbed in the contemplation of sublime beauty. I could, as it were, feel the stuff of it beneath my fingertips. I had attained to that supreme degree of sensibility where the divine intimations of art merge with the impassioned sensuality of emotion. As I emerged from the porch of Santa Croce, I was seized with a fierce palpitation of the heart. The wellspring of life was dried up within me, and I walked in constant fear of falling to the ground. Now, somehow I'm asking you here to endure the quite creepy voice in this brief 43-second video.
Have you ever visited a city whose beauty completely overwhelmed you? I mean, not just making you say wow and take some pictures, but a place that has such beautiful art or architecture that it affects your body and mind profusely. If so, you are not the first nor the last to experience this. There's actually a name for this, the Stendhal Syndrome. It's a psychosomatic condition that arises when somebody is completely overwhelmed by the beauty of art. It's a mental condition which leads to physical symptoms like an increased heartbeat, dizziness, confusion, fainting, or a panic attack.
Florence syndrome, art syndrome, tourist disease, call it what you will. The condition was professionally diagnosed and named Stendhal syndrome in 1979 by the Italian psychiatrist Dr. Graziele Magherini, chief psychiatrist at Florence's Santa Maria Novella Hospital from the late 1960s onward, who would publish a book with this very title in 1989, and you see her holding this publication. The British Medical Journal noted in a study that she had recorded 106 incidents of patients being admitted to the hospital between 1977 and 1986 after experiencing, quote, acute transient psychiatric symptoms in response to viewing the art of Florence, end quote. She found that the syndrome hits mostly first-time Western European tourists, usually unmarried persons between the ages of 20 and 40. American visitors seem less affected. Make of that what you will. Symptoms include palpitations, dizziness, fainting, nausea, and hallucinations. While some affected have been encountered wandering the streets, unable to recall their names, about 2/3 of the affected develop paranoid psychoses. Most sufferers are able to return home after a few days of bed rest. Another published medical paper describes Stendhal syndrome as follows, and I quote, although it is colloquially known that beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder, it is necessary to mention that the appreciation of beauty contained in masterpieces is not perceived only through the eyes, but through other sense organs as well. The reaction triggers a series of somatosensory responses of diverse nature, with a wide range of responses that altogether constitute a pathological phenomenon that can be defined as syndromic by eliciting signs and symptoms of a physical, physiological, and psychotic nature, end quote. Now, being but a mere art historian, the word somatosensory sent me to my dictionary. Quote, says the dictionary, of or relating to sensations that involve parts of the body not associated with the primary sense organs. I hasten to add that though the evidence is real, Stendhal syndrome is not included in the 2023 American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. As a geographic aside, and a semantic one at that, Florence is not alone in having a syndrome associated with it. First reported in 2011, Detroit syndrome is a form of age discrimination in which workers of a certain age are replaced by those who are younger, faster, and stronger, not to mention endowed with new skills better suited for the modern workplace. Stockholm syndrome refers to when persons taken hostage develop an emotional attachment or sense of loyalty toward their captors or abusers. Some even start to actively cooperate, crossing the line from victim to perpetrator. This syndrome was first named after a bank robbery turned hostage situation in Stockholm in the summer of 1973. The robbers held 4 bank employees hostage for 6 days in the building I show you at left. The hostages were strapped to dynamite and locked up in a vault. After the negotiated surrender of the robbers, the hostages said they felt more afraid of the police, raised money for the defense of the captors, and refused to testify against them. One of the hostages even became engaged to one of her captors. Lima syndrome describes the exact opposite of the Stockholm syndrome. That is, the captors develop positive attachments to their hostages. The name refers to a crisis in the Peruvian capital in December 1996 when, at the Japanese ambassadorial residence seen here at right, members of the Tupac Amaru revolutionary movement took 600 guests hostage. The captors became so empathetic toward the guests that they let most of them go within days, including high-value individuals such as the mother of the then president of Peru. Marie-Henri Bayle was born in Grenoble in 1783 and died in Paris in 1842 at the age of 59. He led an unhappy childhood. His mother, Henriette, whom he adored, died in childbirth when he was 7, and he intensely disliked his father. Seen here at left, Cherubin Bayle, a lawyer in Parliament. But our man of the day was close to his maternal grandfather, Henri Gagnon, a doctor of medicine, who you see here on the right. And it was in this home of his grandfather that the youth was lodged. A plaque on the still existing dwelling calls attention to this. I took these photos in 2017. I've had this lecture topic in the back of my mind for some time. Bayle, and if I say Bayle, I mean Stendhal, that's his pen name, did have a long-standing fondness for his sister Pauline and conducted correspondence with her for decades after he departed Grenoble at the age of 16. A little-known French painter, Pierre-Joseph de Dreux, is responsible for this rendering of Stendhal, who first ventured to Paris for study. Not long thereafter, he was in Italy, where he joined General Bonaparte's army, in which he would serve as a soldier and subsequently as an administrator, including during the 1812 invasion of Russia. In fact, in his own lifetime, he was best known as a fervent supporter of Napoleon. Today, however, he is best known as a novelist, more on this momentarily, but he also was a critic, art historian, musicologist, journalist, biographer, diarist, and letter writer. In light of the syndrome that bears his name, he borrowed his pen name Stendhal from the German city of Stendhal, birthplace of Johann Joachim Winckelmann, an art historian and archaeologist of fame at that time. I found it quite curious in my reading about him that he regularly recorded his word, sensations. He waxed eloquent about chestnut trees, about music, church bells, mountains, the view atop Mount Vesuvius, watching sunrises and sunsets, observing a comet on the 31st of August, 1811 at 3 a.m., witnessing an eclipse, observing fires. He described Moscow burning as, quote, the most beautiful blaze in the world, and certainly women's faces. His diary entry frequently employs superlatives. 30 April, 1818, the nicest evening I've ever had in Paris. On visiting the Sèvres porcelain factory, the prettiest manufactured objects I've ever seen. On his love of Italy, Milan in particular, I sense in every pore of my body that this country is the land of the arts. I believe that the arts hold the same place in the hearts of the inhabitants of inhabitants of Italy as vanity does in the hearts of the French. And on the occasion of Napoleon's remains' return to Paris in 1840, he opined that the tomb should be a brick copy of the temple at Paestum, the most beautiful thing in Italy, he wrote. Not surprisingly, he was always fretting about experiencing boredom or himself being boring. Stendhal is best known today for the novels Le Rouge et le Noir, The Red and the Black, published in 1830, and La Chartreuse de Parme, The Charterhouse of Parma, published in 1839. The notorious womanizer also penned a tome on love. I show the title page of an early French edition, as well as the cover of a Penguin classic. 4 of his liaisons, often persons affiliated with the opera, were Minette de Griesheim at left, Angela Petragura, Mathilde Dembowski, and Giulia Ranieri de la Roche. This is the last known portrait of Stendhal, a drawing by Henri Lehmann, a German-born French artist. In Stendhal's later years, he suffered from ailments associated with syphilis and treatments for the disorder. At 59, aware of his failing heart, Stendhal wrote to a friend, "I find there is nothing ridiculous about dropping dead in the streets, as long as one doesn't do it deliberately." As would happen, he suffered a stroke on the Rue des Capucines, not far from the Place Vendôme on the right bank, and Stendhal passed away in his nearby apartment on the 23rd of March, 1842. When residing in Paris in 2023, I sought out Stendhal's grave in the Montmartre Cemetery, where he is buried, and I paid my respects to the man. In the Luxembourg Gardens, there is a monument to him, the Tondo profile portrait of him on it by Rodin after David d'Angers. And in both the French and Italian capitals, there are plaques honoring his residences in Paris and Rome. His native Grenoble has named a school after him, and one can find in that city a museum dedicated to him. This, even though he had written of his native city, Grenoble is for me like the memory of an abominable indigestion. The fame of the man is alive and well. I show you a street placard I encountered in Paris 3 years ago announcing a conference on him. That's what I meant to show right now. And there's a music festival in Ireland bearing his name each summer. This coming year it runs from the 2nd to the 4th of July, if you wish to attend. And as should not surprise, a movie about the syndrome was made in 1996. I'm making this word up. Stendhalian commerce is rampant. Want a red and black necklace to go with your reading? Voila. Need lipstick? No problem. How about perfume? Can do. Even the clothier J. Peterman warns that Stendhal Syndrome could befall others if you slip into one of its slinky red dresses. Put simply, as the idiom has it, sex sells. Permit, if you will, now a slight tangent at this juncture in my lecture that will address a corollary of sorts of the Stendhal Syndrome. In late October of last year, the art blogosphere was alive with headlines such as, "Does art make you healthier?" and "First of its kind study proves positive impact of art on the body." The Art Daily for October 29th, 2025, quote, London, "A first-of-its-kind study launched by Art Fund's National Art Pass provides the most compelling scientific evidence to date that viewing art has immediate, measurable benefits for our health and well-being. undertaken by King's College London and co-funded by Art Fund, the UK's national charity for museums and galleries, and the Psychiatry Research Trust. The study measured the physiological responses of participants while viewing masterpieces by world-renowned artists, including Van Gogh, Manet, and Gauguin in a gallery. The article continued, the research found that art activates the immune, endocrine, and autonomic nervous systems all at once, something never previously recorded. Art Fund hopes the findings will encourage more people to visit their local museums and galleries to experience these proven health benefits firsthand. The cited study, and I quote again, suggests that art can arouse, deeply relax, and reduce stress levels at the same time when viewed in a gallery, which experts say is effectively a cultural workout of the body. In short, our unique and original study provides compelling evidence that viewing art in a gallery is good for you. The research also revealed that neither personality traits nor emotional intelligence influenced responses, suggesting the broad health benefits of art on the body are universal. Another press report, one that included this image of a woman vigorously singing from a balcony in Seville, Spain, at the outset of the COVID epidemic, in the Art News in October of 2025, over the past few decades, there's been an increasing public awareness in both the arts and medical communities that art may play a role in promoting physical and mental health, now an initiative launched by the World Health Organization, Jamal Arts and Health Lab, and the medical journal The Lancet will show scientific evidence for the idea. A growing body of evidence shows that engaging in the arts, including music, theater, dance, and visual arts, offers wide-ranging mental, physical, and social health benefits. Yo-Yo Ma certainly knows that. Music offers wide-ranging mental, physical, and social health benefits. Here is the renowned cellist in March 2021 in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, in the Berkshire Mountains at the Berkshire Community College Gymnasium, giving an impromptu performance in a vaccine waiting room after having just received his second dose of the corona vaccine. I ask you to remember your mood when you first were vaccinated, and you'll see what I'm referring to. To return to the subject at hand, the Stendhal Syndrome. In a book published in 2023 by Dachner, D-A-C-H-N-E-R, Dachner Keltner, quote in the book's title, Awe, the New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life, the author writes, and I quote, awe is really a feeling state. It's this emotion you have when you encounter a vast mystery. In my 5 decades of studying art history and being a professional art historian, to varying degrees I have experienced the effects of Stendhal Syndrome. However, I forthrightly acknowledge that my responses may more accurately fall into what Keltner has labeled as awe. Awe, wonder. I have had impassioned responses to works of art that have overwhelmed my emotions, and I can emphatically assert that I've had physical responses too, the additional characteristic that distinguishes Stendhal Syndrome, though I have stayed hospital-free. I have been spellbound in the presence of things that evoke in me a sense of the sublime, that induce in me the transcendent, that conjure in me the ineffable. To be sure, there are at least 2 components at play in this dynamic, the object and the individual. Botticelli's Birth of Venus and the individual who suffered a heart attack before it. Il Volterrano's Sibyls in the dome of the Niccolini Chapel in Santa Croce and Stendhal. And whereas the object is inert, immutable, timeless, doubtless the expectations, the motivations, the circumstances of the individual play no small part in engendering the phenomenon that I am addressing. Witness the aforementioned statement by Stendhal: "As I descended upon Florence from the high ridges of the Apennine, my heart was leaping wildly within me." I have to cite the wonderful loan from the National Gallery of Art. In your galleries right now, there's a Botticelli on view in this wonderful museum. Make sure you go see it. Full disclosure, in 1998, this individual, that is, your speaker, organized a small exhibition at the Toledo Museum of Art, which I titled "Seeking the Sublime, Paintings by Friedrich and Koch on Loan." What I wanted to imply with my wording of the show's title, "Seeking the Sublime," was the proactive searching for the transcendent in nature by two 19th century German painters, Caspar David Friedrich and Joseph Anton Koch. But in hindsight, 28 years on, I acknowledge I am forced to muse. Was the seeking of the sublime no less that of the exhibition's organizer, that is, my own? In the spring of 1974, as a 19-year-old college sophomore, while studying in the city of Blois, France, I purposely ventured during the midterm break to Athens to join up for a few days with a classics professor and his students from a class that I had audited. I visited the Acropolis in Athens, which I show you here in my Kodak Instamatic photograph taken from the Agora below. And here the west and southern flank of the Parthenon and the Propylaea, the ceremonial gateway to the Acropolis, constructed in 437 to 432 BC in the Doric order. Be it a propensity I have on occasion to not look where I am going, or ought it to be attributed to utter awe, I remember to this day what is now 52 years ago, falling flat on my face as I ascended the immense stairs of the Propylaea. Not watching my footing, Stendhal Syndrome, I'm still not sure. Three years later, in 1977, after graduating from college, I put on a backpack and traveled around the globe. No surprise, I intentionally made it to Egypt. At Giza, I was dumbstruck by the immensity of the Pyramid of Khufu, the tomb of the Old Kingdom, 4th dynasty pharaoh, also known as Cheops. The base of the overwhelming edifice measures 756 feet, in excess of 2.5 football fields, and the footprint of the pyramid takes up 13 acres. It's incomprehensibly massive. It took some 2.3 million large blocks to erect, each estimated to weigh 2.5 tons, and each of consequential height, which you can gauge from this image. I climbed barefoot to the apex of the Pyramid of Cheops. Even attempting to do so today would land one behind bars. But this was 1977. Things were quite different, including my waistline. That's the Pyramid of Khephren at left. Rather matter-of-factly, even tritely, I jotted in my journal that evening, I climbed to the top of the 137-meter Great Pyramid of Cheops today. It is 4,630 years old, being built in the years around 2,650 BC. I have seen plenty of impressive objects in this world, but the pyramids are truly astounding. Staying with colossal structures having spiritual intent that profoundly awed me, on the island of Java in Indonesia, I visited Borobudur, the 9th century Buddhist temple northwest of Yogyakarta. Only rediscovered in 1806, it had been completely covered in vegetal growth, ash, and dirt. The base of the 9-tiered massif measures 404 feet. The sides of each level are decorated with more than 2,000 relief panels. You can see some in this photograph from 1913. And atop the temple were initially 72 Buddha statues, each seated inside a perforated stupa. Both monks and tourists enter onto the precinct itself today, and the confluence of spiritual devotion and tourism is, to be sure, jarring. But the sheer scale of the temple, as well as its massive sculptural decorations, truly engenders wonder. Another Buddhist gem of an entirely different character, which rendered me absorbed in the contemplation of sublime beauty, to quote Stendhal. The Zen garden of Ryoanji Temple in Kyoto. Founded in 1450, its white gravel and 15 stones enable, yea, compel, silent contemplation. I first gawked at the stained glass windows of Sainte-Chapelle on the Ile de la Cité in Paris more than 5 decades ago, and I have been drawn back I cannot count how many times since. Commissioned by King Louis IX to house his collection of relics of the Passion of Christ, the superlative Gothic Holy Chapel was consecrated in 1248. The walls, if one can call them that, appear to be entirely made of stained glass. The colors, the patterns, the experience of light, the phenomenon of standing in the presence of these marvels is staggeringly indescribable. Jumping more than 7 centuries, I.M. Pei's design of the Miho Museum, located on a mountaintop not far from Kyoto, is bewilderingly beautiful. I have had the good fortune of having twice visited this uncanny site, and its achievement is one of the highest order. As Pei described, one embarks on a journey when experiencing his creation. One crosses a bridge, enters a lengthy curving tunnel, and is released to a vista of the museum proper. Traversing a courtyard, one ascends stairs and arrives at an astonishing threshold, a transparent one that more than hints at what is beyond. A vista to a bonsai-esque tree and mountains beyond. Sublime beauty, to quote Stendhal once again. In an interview she gave in 2006, she who gave me my first museum position, Anne Darnancourt, rest in peace, a former director of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, stated, "I think we remember art in many ways. One we certainly remember is individual encounters with works of art that are like a thunderclap. We suddenly find ourselves in front of something, and we are mesmerized and can't forget it. It is an encounter, and that can happen anywhere. You can walk around the corner and have this amazing experience. What life depends on is encounters." As for Darnancourt's usage of the verb mesmerize, the word, as you may know, derives from the 18th century German physician Franz Anton Mesmer, who proposed the existence of a process of natural energy transference occurring between all animate and inanimate objects, which he called animal magnetism, and which came to be referred to as mesmerism. As we consider Stendhal Syndrome, I trust you will register this is not a mere semantic digression on my part. In January of 1984, I visited the old Master Painting Gallery in Dresden, renowned for, among numerous other standouts, paintings by Caravaggio and Rembrandt. I walked around the corner and had this amazing experience and came upon this painting which you have been looking at, a work by an artist I in fact had previously never heard of, Jean-Étienne Lyotard. It completely overwhelmed me. Lyotard's masterpiece, La Belle Chocolatière, The Chocolate Girl, is a pastel datable around 1743. Within a decade, it came into the possession of King August III of Poland, who wrote of it to a collector acquaintance, "I have bought a pastel picture about 3 feet high by the celebrated Lyotard. It shows a young German chambermaid in profile, carrying a tray with a glass of water and a cup of chocolate. The picture is almost devoid of shadows, with a pale background, the light being furnished by 2 windows reflected in the glass." It is painted in halftones with imperceptible gradations of light and with a perfect modeling, end quote. Lyotard, who you see here in 2 self-portraits, lived from 1702 to 1790. He was a Swiss artist who worked in Paris, Holland, and England in both pastels and oils. What is it about Lyotard's Chocolate Girl that stupefied me so? The balance of the composition, the subtlety of the colors, the rendering of stuffs, and the aura, the mood, the silence of the image. To give you a quick viewing of 2 other works by this singular creative talent, in this oil painting in the Getty Museum of about 1781-83, Still Life with Tea Service, a tray is set with 6 cups and saucers, a teapot, sugar bowl, milk jug, and a lidded vase, perhaps containing an extra supply of tea leaves. And in this pastel from about 1755, also in the Getty, portrait of Maria Frederica von Rede-Alfoni, the 7-year-old daughter of an aristocratic Dutch family, looks off to the side in 3/4 view. Lost in thought, she is composed, yet somewhat shy in comparison to her dog, who stares out with canine curiosity. It was this very object, Lyotard's The Chocolate Girl, that was the catalyst for me keeping a list of socks knockers, as I call works of art that overwhelm me with awe, a list from which I'm drawing for this presentation. And if I've already shared with you architectural standouts from the Propylaea in Athens to Iampe near Kyoto, I want to now focus further on paintings. A single panel altarpiece, datable 1435 to 38, today in the Prado in Madrid, is a creation that has repeatedly stolen my breath. Rogier van der Weyden's Deposition. I have already acknowledged that, as held true for Stendhal and Florence, the circumstances of the individual inextricably contribute to one's response to a work of art. The not inconsequential role of one's adherence to or dismissal of the tenets of the belief system central to this image will come to bear on one's response to the representation. Yet it is the sheer mastery of the composition of this painting, in contradistinction to the countless others of the subject, that I find transcendent. The frieze-like arrangement of the 10 figures in a shallow foreground space, St. John at left in red and Mary Magdalene at right, encloses, as it were, the stop-action drama depicted. Absolutely every brushstroke, every detail serves to convey the message at hand. Nicodemus receiving the body of Christ from Joseph of Arimathea, and the various responses of the 8 other protagonists in the painting. And it is the language of hands that is so utterly poignant in this painting. Not to be overlooked, van der Weyden represents one figure, the woman at upper left, experiencing grief so intensely that she covers her eyes. If art could depict the manners and the mind, there would be no painting on earth more beautiful, reads the inscription on the painted paper at the center right in this portrait of Giovanna degli Albizzi, a gem of 1488 by the Florentine master Domenico Ghirlandaio, which today is displayed in the Thyssen-Bornemisza collection in Madrid. The sitter had married Lorenzo Tornabuoni in 1486 and died 2 years subsequent to this immortalization of her beauty. The composition portrays Giovanna in half-length in strict profile, silhouetted against the dark ground and an open closet with jewelry and a book. Her slender neck, her blonde hair in a complex configuration, and her expressionless face are alluring indeed. She holds a handkerchief while red beads, curiously but visually thrillingly, are suspended at the upper right. A final observation, Ghirlandaio meticulously renders the rich, luxurious fabrics of her garments. I find the painting trance-inducing. Raphael's portrait of Baldassare Castiglione is truly one of my all-time favorite works of art. A courtier, diplomat, soldier, and author, the man lived from 1478 to 1529. He thus was set 37 or 38 when this portrait was painted in 1515 to 16. And since this is by Raphael, and there's a Raphael retrospective coming up at the Metropolitan later this spring, I cite that to you all today. This painting, this Renaissance icon, hangs in the Louvre. The portrait is in one sense confrontational. Castiglione peers directly out at us, his large blue eyes commanding that they become our focal point. The flesh tones of his countenance are entirely surrounded by a neat brown beard and his expansive black beret, the circular contour of which is wondrously broken. Depicted half-length, Raphael endowed Castiglione with a pervasive and one might say total calm. Stasis prevails. He gives the form of the figure a pyramidal stability. His hands, only partially rendered, are clasped together at the lower left. I submit that we would register this man's intellectual and moral character even if the identity of the sitter were unknown. In the event, we know that Castiglione was the author of a book of manners, etiquette, and morality called Il Cortegiano, in translation, the Book of the Courtier. Published in 1528, hence some 13 years after Raphael's painting, its subject is a discussion of what constitutes an ideal Renaissance gentleman. To be sure, an ideal Renaissance gentleman needs to look like Raphael's portrait of Baldassare Castiglione. This is my copy of the book with ruffled pages. I've read it a number of times. Rembrandt. His drawings are masterful. When I inquired of my undergraduate professor, Frank Robinson, a lifelong friend to this day, The standard question, how long did it take to make the landscape with a farmstead, in the upper left, formerly known as Winter Landscape, which I viewed on an excursion in 1974 to the Fogg Art Museum at Harvard? He responded, maybe 30 seconds, or I could also reply, a lifetime. The same can be said of the tender study at right of his wife, Saskia, in bed. And his subject paintings are profound examinations of the human condition. On the screen now, Isaac and Rebecca, in the past known as the Jewish Bride, and the Denial of St. Peter, both in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. But for me, the Rembrandt Socksknocker is his 1654 portrait of Jan Six, which to this day remains in the possession of the Six family in their home in Amsterdam, overlooking the Amstel River. Jan Six, a longtime acquaintance of the artist, ran a dye works, but he was also a poet, and subsequent to this painting would become burgomaster mayor of Amsterdam. Rembrandt's genius in portraiture was his unrivaled capacity to not only depict a person's outer appearance, but also his ability to convey a person's inner life. What Jan Six is thinking about, who knows? But certain is that he is lost in thought. Six, in fact, wrote about this portrait of himself, quote, "Such a face had I, Jan Six, who since childhood have worshipped the muses." Rembrandt's brushstrokes are rapid and controlled. An ungloved hand is captured in the process of pulling on the other. Distinguishing between a Rembrandt and a not Rembrandt invariably comes down to just how convincing the execution of such a detail actually is. And you are looking at creative virtuosity here. I show you an acquaintance of mine, Jan Six the 11th, seated with Rembrandt's painting of his ancestor. I happen to know Jan Six the 11th had a son, and he did not name him Jan Six. Jan Six the 10th was not very happy with that. A subject domain leap from portraiture to landscapes. For me, all roads at the Metropolitan Museum in New York lead to Peter Bruegel the Elder's The Harvesters. I never tire of the composition. In fact, just last week, I gawked at it again just this past Friday. One of 6 panels painted in 1565 on commission from an Antwerp merchant for his country house, each representing 2 months, the series therefore comprising a year. 5 of the 6 are survive, the others are in the museums in Vienna and Prague. Here, July and August are thought to be represented. Foreground, middle distance, and a vast distance, microcosm and macrocosm, near tree and far off coast and horizon line. While some laborers work in the fields at harvest time, others eat, and one unforgettable sprawled fellow is fast asleep. Ostensibly a realistic view, a 16th century photographic rendering, if you will, such an elevated vantage point simply does not exist in Flanders, and so artistic license has been called upon. With Nicholas Poussin's Landscape with a Calm of 1650 to 51, realism entirely metamorphoses into the realm of idealism. Today in the Getty Museum, this dreamscape was painted by the French artist in Rome for a Parisian friend. Landscape with a Calm does not illustrate a story, rather it evokes a mood, one of tranquility. The composition is ordered, the eye is led from foreground to middle distance, to the mountainous distance with trees and reflections of trees, with buildings and reflections of buildings, offering us visual clues to the linking of associated spaces. An inventory drawn up of the first owner's collection described the painting thusly: a castle lit by the sun, and in front a herdsman with his goats. And in the same inventory, there's a citation, a mention of the pendant that Poussin painted, landscape with a storm, now in the museum in Rouen. Quote, thunder and storm with a cart drawn by oxen. Rudolph II, Holy Roman Emperor in Prague, obtained this unicum prior to 1604, just a couple of years after its creation, and it is recorded that he, and I quote, was most astonished by the technique and how it was done, calling in some practitioners of art who were also amazed, for it is very interesting and effective to look upon, unquote. Mirabile visu indeed. It is from the inimitable hand of Hendrick Goltzius. I cannot tell a lie. I wrote my dissertation on the paintings of this engaging late 16th, early 17th century Dutch talent. And I cannot tell a lie. I was responsible for my then employer, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, acquiring this painting in 1900. The technique, bluish-gray oil paint as a ground, pen and ink applied so as to appear as engraved lines, and finely brushed on oil colors, red, orange, yellow, a transparent crimson, and white. The subject is taken from a maxim of the Roman dramatist Terence, without Ceres and Bacchus, Venus would freeze, which appears in his comedy The Eunuch, written in 161 BC. Everything about this object is ravishingly memorable. Juan Sanchez Coton, a Spaniard, painted this balancing act of an unforgettable still life in 1602, which today is in the collection of the San Diego Museum of Art. Quince, cabbage, melon, and cucumber suspended or lying on the ledge. It is an unflinching, naturalistic, deceptively simple painting, but it is also music and poetry. It could be argued that the sense of discovery plays a role in experiencing awe, or in its extreme, the Stendhal Syndrome. As with Liotard, I had never heard of this 17th century Dutch artist when I first oogled the painting in the Mauritshuis in The Hague. Still life with earthenware jug and clay pipes was painted by a 23-year-old named Pieter van Anrad in 1658. A number of run-of-the-mill portraits from his hand are known, but this is the solitary still life in the artist's oeuvre. The design strength of Anrad's composition, an earthenware jug, a coal pan, an adjacent dish of tobacco and stone pipes, and a glass of dark ale, all on a tabletop partially covered by a green cloth, is absolutely perfect. The soft light entering from the left is reflected by each object in its own particular way. Would that we had additional still lives from this superb, refined artist. And I was very excited today in your galleries to see the 19th century American painter Robert Street's The Basket of Apples, 1818, the label which reads, "It is the only still life known from his hand." Jean-Simeon Chardin, Basket of Wild Strawberries, has been in my life since the autumn of 1979, when I lived with the picture, as it were, for 12 weeks during my year as a National Endowment for the Arts graduate intern at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, during the Paris, Cleveland, Boston retrospective devoted to this magician painter, as the contemporary critic Diderot labeled him. The composition is simple, and for once I'll restrain myself and refrain from including adjectives and adverbs before that word. I'll actually opt for simply complex. The first time it was published in 1862, the painting was described as a basket of strawberries, a crystal glass half full of water shimmering with the rosy reflection of a fine peach, placed near 2 white carnations and some cherries. That is all he needed to make an exquisite piece. Long in a renowned private collection, this treasure only within the last 3 years appeared at auction, and after protracted bureaucracy, the French state had put an export block on the picture. The canvas became the 34th Chardin in the collection of the Louvre. Recently cleaned, it is a prize, a sheer glory to behold. And 20 minutes before this lecture, while checking the news on my phone, I heard that the Louvre has just today, one day after the resignation of the previous Louvre director, the Louvre has named a new director, Christophe Leribaud. Six dead fish heaped in a pile on a dark green surface, their bulging eyes alarmingly and disconcertingly unmistakable. Francesco Goya, the late 18th, early 19th century Spanish painter, one of the most deservedly famous artists of the Western world of all time, painted this and 11 other renderings of dead birds and animals, a series of still lifes that the artist hung in his own dining room. Others today are in the Louvre, the Prado, and one in a private collection that often is on loan to the Met, among other locations. Though ostensibly about food, the true subject of Goya's still life with bream, the fish, as well as the others of his series, is human mortality. It is a stupendous, challenging image. I cannot get the work out of my mind, if only in part, because in 1994, the painting was offered to the Toledo Museum of Art by a dealer in Paris. I tried vehemently to make my case for the painting, but curators recommend and directors decide, and alas, it was not to be. I shared the offering with a curator colleague then at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, and one has to go to Texas to see it. You'll never forget it. Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres painted this portrait of Louis-François Bertin in 1832, in which year the sitter was 66 years of age. Bertin was a French journalist from the time of the Revolution onwards, including the Napoleonic era and the Bourbon Restoration thereafter. I visited the Louvre, which possesses this canvas, on more than 20 occasions during the 5 months I resided in Paris in 2023, and equally as often during the 5 months that I lived in Paris in the first half of last year. And on most sessions in the galleries of my favorite museum in the world, I would make a point to say hello to Ingres' portrait of Bertin. I relish the man's demeanor. His tousled hair is riveting. His eyes are curious. His downturned mouth is probing. For me, the portrait is almost hypnotic. And Bertin's hands, or ought I to say claws, are positively enthralling. Henri Matisse's still life with fishbowl, today in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, a Fauvist endeavor of 1912, painted in the artist's garden conservatory in his home in Issy-les-Moulineaux, then a southwest suburb of Paris, is an enchanting favorite. But it is the Chapel of the Rosary, known as the Matisse Chapel in Vence, on the French Riviera that is the thunderclap for me by this 20th century creative giant. The structure was built and decorated between 1947 and 1951 and was considered by the artist to be his masterpiece. Matisse worked on the architecture, painted the murals and designed the stained glass windows, and also designed the priest's vestments. Matisse, here seated in the chapel, and my apologies for this out-of-focus image, Matisse wrote, "In the chapel advance, I have tried to achieve that balance of forces. The blues, greens, and yellows of the windows compose a light within the chapel. This light made up of colors is intended to play upon the white and black stencil surface of the wall facing the windows. The light is the essential element, coloring, warming, and animating the whole structure, to which it is desired to give an impression of boundless space despite its small dimensions." End quote. The totality of the conception, as well as its multimedia execution, strikes awe. I show you here the famous photograph from 1950 of Jackson Pollock painting in his East Hampton studio, pouring or dripping paint onto the canvas, now not on an easel, rather on the floor. The final socks knocker I choose to share is Jackson Pollock's number 11, 1952. And alas, this slide is not in sharp focus. I'll show you in a moment one that is. But I show it because the image conveys the scale of the canvas. It measures just shy of 7 feet high and is 16 feet wide. It is usually called an abstract expressionist painting, but to my mind, it is more correctly to be understood as a non-representational painting, since there have been abstracting expressionistic creations based on visual reality for well over 5,000 years. In fact, I'm actually contemplating another lecture on modalities of representation and want to elaborate on this very point. Renamed Blue Poles reportedly by the artist himself, Pollock's painting was purchased by the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra in 1973. The only time I have experienced this wonderful canvas was at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in the 1999 Pollock retrospective. It was displayed on a freestanding wall in the center of a gallery, and I distinctly remember sensing an inexplicable magnetism when I was physically in the space of blue poles. I walked away from it, I returned to it. I walked away from it, I returned to it. And this played out a number of times. It was as if a force were holding me in its presence. No ambulance had to whisk me away, but something greater than a visual response was taking hold of me. It was physical. In retrospect, thoughts of the Stendhal Syndrome. I would note, just as an aside, that just yesterday the Met in New York announced that this autumn they will put on an exhibition called Krasner and Pollock Past Continuous. And I wish to note your museum's fine Krasner Happy Lady, 1963. Now, I well trust that this cataloging of awe responses that I have experienced in the presence of works of art over the years just perhaps has engendered in your minds comparable inventories of like incidences which have left you, be it in the Flynn Institute of Art or elsewhere. Shortly, I will open to the floor to questions, but I want to put you on notice. I will be asking the first question, and it will be, would anyone be willing to share a Stendhal Syndrome experience or one of intense awe? To give you a chance to formulate your thoughts, I first want to convey the responses to this very question that I posed in advance of this presentation to 3 individuals, each having granted me permission to share their words. Tracy Glabb, executive director of the Flint Institute of Arts, responded in this manner: I have had several emotional experiences with artworks over the years, but one of the most memorable was Rembrandt's self-portrait at age 63 in the National Gallery, London. It was during my first trip to London in 2009. Not only did I cry in front of it for no explicable reason, but I also had the feeling that the artist was staring directly into my soul. I was transfixed and afraid to move. I have had similar feelings since then with portraits by Rembrandt, but this one was the most intense. If portraits could be haunted or possessed, this would have made me a believer. End quote. Chuck Shawbar, a very talented artist here in the Flint area, answered my inquiry this way: two pieces of art that have had a profound impression on me are as follows. Cabinet on a Stand, French, Paris, circa 1645. Oak and poplar wood veneered with ebony, ivory, stained ivory, bone, and various marquetry woods. Metropolitan Museum of Art. I first saw this cabinet in 2009. The second object that Shawbar noted is this. In the DIA, a desktop cabinet, decorated at the center with an inlay of Orpheus, surrounded by Pietro Duri, animals on other panels. Grand Ducal Workshops, circa 1620, Detroit Institute of Arts. I remember first seeing this cabinet 60 plus years ago at the DIA, end quote. At left is Shawbar's Roadscape, a marquetry cabinet on a stand created in 2000, which entered the collection of the Flint Institute of Arts in 2023, and you doubtless can detect the resonance it conveys with both the Met and Detroit objects. The gallery's object label for this, Roadscape, reads in part, the 10 images you see on the interior and doors of this cabinet are based on photographs that Shawbar has taken during his travels across the U.S. Although they may look like paintings, the images are made up of stained pieces of wood and were assembled using a technique called marquetry, which gained popularity in Europe in the late 16th century and involves cutting thin sheets of wood into intricate shapes and affixing them to a surface. The cabinet on stand structure is a traditional furniture form that also has roots in Europe of the 16th and 17th centuries. And lastly, I hope you're all thinking of things to share, the generous mecenas of the Sheppy Dog Fund lecture series, as well as much else in the FIA, quite kindly got back to me with the following. Alan Klein wrote, the experience that I remember as being the most emotional for me was during my first trip to Egypt in the late 1990s and visiting the tomb of Queen Nefertari, wife of Ramses the Great. I knew nothing about Queen Nefertari or anything about Egypt at all. Being inside was magical, exclamation point. Inside was over 5,000 square feet of beautiful paintings everywhere, even the ceiling. It looked as if the paintings had just been finished. Ruby red, sapphire blues, emerald greens, exclamation point. I wanted to touch them to see if the paint was still wet. We were in awe, exclamation point. We were immersed in a different space, a different time. We didn't want to leave. We just wanted to stay. After 15 minutes, the guard told us to leave, but we didn't want to leave. We didn't leave voluntarily. He had to come inside and grab each one of us and separately and escort us out. But when he went back in to retrieve another one of us, the one who had been retrieved re-entered behind him. It probably took him another 15 minutes for him to get us all outside. The 5 of us lingered just outside the entrance, wanting to go back inside. We were overwhelmed with the experience we just had. It was as if we were exhausted from what we had just seen, and still we wanted to remain close to the tomb. End quote. Key words and characteristics from these 3 accounts, which in many ways replicate aspects of my own aforementioned experiences. The sense of discovery, memory, the passage of time, 16 years, 27 or so years, 60 years ago, and the desire to maintain physical proximity with an object. In conclusion, I would note that in November 1812, while in Napoleon's army on its fateful retreat from Moscow, Stendhal wrote in a letter to his sister Pauline, thinking he might not survive, "Farewell, write to me, and remember to enjoy yourself. Life is brief." The intended art historical information in this lecture notwithstanding, if there's a single takeaway from this lecture, let it be Stendhal's words, "Remember to enjoy yourself. Life is brief." Or, just possibly, this New Yorker cartoon, the caption of which reads, "Stendhal said this, Stendhal said that. Don't you know what anybody else ever said?" I thank you for your attention.